For Senator Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Devos, welcome back to the subcommittee.
Thank you.
I regret that we are discussing a budget proposal that doesn't support all students seeking to learn in our education system. I won't repeat what Senator Murray said, but I totally agree with her statements. Let me go into another area. You are the chair of the President's School Safety Commission. That was formed after the school shooting in Florida left 17 students and educators dead. Our country is now averaging a school shooting each week. In fact, one day after the commission met last month, another 10 students and teachers were killed in Santa Fe, Texas. I understand your commission intends to release its recommendations by the end of the year. Will your commission look at the role of firearms as it relates to gun violence in our schools?
Thanks, Senator, for that question. And it is an honor to serve and to lead this commission. We are focused on the 20-some different provisions.
Will you be looking? I know, I understand there's a lot, but I'm also thinking the chairman has difficulties. So I try to give you a question that could be answered yes or no. Will your commission look at the role of firearms as it relates to gun violence in our schools?
That is not part of the commission's charge per se.
I see. So you're studying gun violence, but not considering the role of guns.
We're actually studying school safety and how we can ensure our students are safe at school.
You're studying things like how much time they spend on video games and all that, but you can go to a lot of other countries where they spend just as much time, but have only a tiny fraction of the shootings that we do. The gun of choice for mass shooters is an AR-15. Do you believe an 18-year-old high school student should be able to walk into a store, minutes later come out with an AR-15 style gun and hundreds of rounds of ammunition?
Well, sir, I know that this body and your counterparts on the other side of the Capitol have addressed a number of these issues, and I know that you're going to continue to debate them and discuss them.
I try to give you questions that could be answered yes or no. Let me repeat it in case I wasn't clear.
Thank you.
Do you believe an 18-year-old high school student should be able to walk into a store and minutes later come out with an AR-15 style assault weapon and hundreds of rounds of ammunition?
I believe that's very much a matter for debate, and I know that's been debated within this body and will continue to be. Our focus is on raising up successful, proven techniques and approaches to ensuring schools are safe for students to attend.
Are you looking at those other countries where the students have spent just as much time on social media and video games and everything else, but have a much lower gun violence in their schools?
We had a very important meeting last week in Maryland at a school within a district that has employed an approach called PBIS for 16 or 18 years that deals with...
I'm sorry, maybe I didn't make my question clear. Are you looking at some of those countries where the students do just as much time on video games, have just as much time on social media as we do, but do not have gun violence? Are you looking at those at all? That's a yes or no.
Not per se.
Thank you. So we'll look at gun violence in the schools, but not look at guns. It's an interesting concept. Now, I've learned from after-school programs across my own state of Vermont that many of the families who participate are struggling with opioid addiction. I think the same could be said probably of every single state represented by Republicans or Democrats on this body. Are you concerned that by pulling over $1 billion in after-school funding, the Department of Education would be complicating recovery for many families who depend on safe and educational care for their children in order to hold down a job or focus on addiction?
We are very much focused on this program on this problem, and have, in fact, in the budget included $43 million to identify and encourage replication of effective prevention programs. We also know that there is a lot of flexibility.
That's not included in the 11% that you've cut from key programs that do support our students?
The focus is on flexible funding to be used as needed by the districts and the states in which these problems are more prevalent. And we encourage states to take that flexibility and to apply it in ways that it's going to be particularly effective and meaningful for their communities.
Thank you, Senator Leahy. Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Durbin.
Welcome, Madam Secretary. I think we both would agree that when students default on their student loans, there are many losers. The student, the student's family, America's taxpayers, and you might say other students who are counting on that money coming back into the Treasury for their generation to have a chance at higher education. So I want to ask you a question, and I'm going to give you multiple choice answers. Here's the question. Which group of colleges and universities enroll 9% of all post-secondary students, 9% of high school grads, but account for 33% of federal student loan defaults? Here are your choices. Public colleges and universities, private not-for-profit colleges and universities, and for-profit colleges and universities. Which one would you choose?
C.
Exactly right. So could you explain to me why for-profit colleges and universities, which enroll just 9% of high school graduates, account for 33% of all federal student loan defaults?
It's a very serious issue, Senator, and it's one that we have, I think collectively, we have to get much more serious about looking at both the opportunities for students and acknowledge, I think this is a much broader question than just what you're trying to get at.
Well, let me just say.
Because students, students today need to know early on, before they even get into high school, a number of different options that they have to pursue.
But it just seems to me that one class with fewer than 10% of the students and 33% of the student loan defaults, it really has a problem that the other types of universities and colleges don't, at least to some extent. So here's what it comes down to as far as I'm concerned. They are charging too much and they are providing too little. They are misleading these students into debt and enrollment and then casting them off. Now, how can I say something as extreme as that? Because here's what the statistics show. 2 out of 3 graduates from for-profit colleges and universities make less money than their high school graduate counterparts who never attend a university. So they're not making much money. And it also turns out that 3 out of 4 students from these types of for-profit colleges and universities are not able to pay $1 on their federal student debt within 3 years of entering repayment. So a lot is going on here. And luckily for us, you have been in charge of a department which has an investigative unit that is going to keep an eye on these for-profit colleges and universities because they're being investigated by everybody. In fact, some of them are failing because of the abusive approaches they've used in their misleading marketing, Corinthian, Westwood, ITT Tech, and so forth and so on. But here's the thing that troubles me and what I want to ask you a question about. Were you aware, I'm sure you're not aware of this, but you should be, were you aware of the fact that the people you have appointed to the enforcement unit to keep an eye on for-profit colleges and universities that are ripping off students and their families and taxpayers, I'm sure you're not aware of this, but it turns out that the head of the unit, Julian Schmoke, was a former dean at DeVry, one of the largest for-profit colleges and universities in my home state of Illinois. And it also turns out that Robert Eitel in that same unit you appointed, and Diane Auer-Jones and Carlos Muniz were former employees at Bridgepoint and Career Education Corporation, for-profit colleges and universities themselves. So were you aware of the fact that you were appointing people to the enforcement and investigative unit who had a conflict of interest because of their own private careers before they joined you?
Well, Senator, the enforcement unit, part of federal student aid, is very robust and functioning very well. And most of those individuals you just referred to are not part of the enforcement unit, so that's erroneous information.
So tell me what happened at the enforcement unit.
Let me just say, we are very focused on ensuring that colleges and universities have the opportunities that students have are quality, and we have to focus on the opportunities and the outcomes for students.
Well, if you focused on the outcomes, and 33% are defaulting on their student loans, and only 10% of the students, and you took a dozen attorneys in the enforcement unit and cut it down to 3, and then you riddle the unit with people with conflicts of interest, it is no wonder that little or nothing is being done by way of investigation.
Well, I'm sorry, but your information's just erroneous and wrong.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I ask that the article from the New York Times, which catalogs this in detail, and I'm sure you've seen it, be made a part of the record after my question.
So ordered. Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator